Clearly these aren't easy times for the Catholic Church, but there are Catholics in these islands, and I think you're very much one of them, who thinks that there's something worth salvaging here about our church. You know, there's something that we need to hang on to. There's something that's worth fighting for. And I just wondered if I could start off by asking you, what is that? What is the essence of what we need to fight for here?
I think the people of God who believe in the Christian message, of whom there are, we are told, 1.2 billion people in the world, scattered across 5 continents, trying to live good lives, trying to raise good families, trying to be good workmates, trying to be good politicians, trying to live the gospel, trying to honour the great commandment to love one another and to love God. And so that's the church for me. That's when I talk about church, and in particular when I talk about the Catholic Church, bearing in mind that of course the Christian Church is twice that size again, embracing so many other denominations, but the Catholic Church embraces 1.2 billion people. So I think what we're actually looking at is a problem of structure, because in the old imperial church, the people at the top spoke down to the people at the bottom. Nowadays, the people at the bottom have opinions, and they have rights, and they are educated, and they talk back, and the people at the top aren't quite used to that. They've always lived in and through times where they've been able to control the voices, because those voices have always spoken downwards. So it's the upward voices now that they're finding real difficulty in dealing with. And what has occurred in Ireland, it seems to me, is saying to the church that the people of God are running. The people of God have diverged in their views from strict orthodoxy, the strict orthodoxy of the magisterium. That's a very powerful message to be sending to a church that was once so dominant in Ireland, so all-powerful. And I think that's important. Where would you start in terms of church reform? Well, if we go back to Vatican II, it was thought, of course, this was the big reform moment. John the 23rd clearly saw the need to reform. And if we look at the background to why he might have thought that, Europe had just come out of the vilest, most evil, most wicked century in all of human history. The 2 world wars. The locus of those wars, guess where? Christianized Europe. This was a huge challenge, a massive challenge to Christianity coming out of the Second World War. So John the 23rd, before he became Pope, was one of a small group of people who met, along indeed with Winston Churchill and members of the government of Ireland at the time, met secretly in Luxeuil in France, under the auspices of a gathering in honour of St. Columbanus, that great 6th century monk who essentially helped preserve Christianity and indeed civilization for Europe. So they met on the fringes of that in secret, and put the idea that had been put together by Schumann and Monet, the idea of a Europe that would work together in partnership, what we now call the European Union. And they tried it out to see would there be any purchase in the idea, and they found among those men, and it was all men, I think, at that meeting, that they could see the vision, they could see the underpinning values, they could see the virtue in it, and hence was born the European Union. John the 23rd was there. Now, of course, he was a papal nuncio at that time, and he knew that in order when that happened, as it did rather quickly, the generating of the idea for a union started to march on really rather snappily, and I think he understood that level of change also called for changes within the church, that an imperial church structured around a very thin hierarchical spire in the middle and this very broad laity down below, that in the long term would not sustain. And he knew that. Why? Because it was an empire. And he was looking around what had happened to all the empires. The empires at the start of the 20th century were mostly gone by then. And so he was smart, he knew that. And so he starts a process of debate, and coming out of that debate, we had a model of church offered to us, not yet realised, but a model of church that was flatter in structure, where the laity were now noted, all of us, not just the laity, we were all the people of God. And the structure was more like a wheel rather than this rigid hierarchical, very narrowly pointed pyramidical structure. But of course, as we know, the bishops gathered for that from 62 to 65, had some really good ideas, infused some and generated new thinking, but then left no structure to carry through the desire of the council. And they all 2,500 bishops disappeared back to their various dioceses, and that was really that. And of course, the gravitational pull of the old ways of doing things continued.
Yeah. So in other words, they had the right ideas, but they didn't put the structures in place.
They didn't put the structures in place.
And in fact, many people have said now, and you'll know this as well as I do, that Pope Francis is, the Pope who's going back, in a sense, to go forward. He's going back to Vatican II in order to move the Church forward. Do you think that's right? Do you see evidence of that in what he's doing?
I'm not sure that I do. I find Francis very puzzling. He says one thing one day and a contradictory thing another day. So I find him very puzzling. But what I do like about him very much, and think that it might very well subscribe to your view or underline your view, is that he encourages debate. He's not afraid of debate. And he's an argumentative sort of a pope. And I like that because he likes you to argue back. And that has not been the case.
I think just as recently as last week, Pope Francis said that he wanted to do more for women, and he's put a few women in, but I think it is only a handful of women into senior positions in the Vatican. What do you think is what do you think of his track records on women?
It's poor. It's as poor as any other pope. It's no better than any other pope. Yes, you'll have a handful of women. I describe them as you'll have slightly more visibility, but certainly no more voice. The problem is simply this, that in terms of leadership in the church, and I'm talking now about at the highest level, there's no opportunity for women to appear at the highest level. There just isn't. And that's simply because, of course, leadership at that level is mediated entirely through the ordained priesthood. And they have told us emphatically that women cannot be ordained. Now, while I disagree with that, and I think the theology on which that is based is really rather thin and poor, but I'm prepared not to argue it any longer. Life is too short to be, arguing over what I regard as a theology that is so thin that sooner or later it's going to collapse under its own dead weight. But I'd much rather talk about something else, and that is, given the Church has that position, given that is the position of the Pope and the Magisterium, well then tell me, as a woman, how you propose to allow the 600 million women who are members of the Church to make a really significant contribution to doctrine, to interpretation of doctrine, to dogma, to the Church teaching. Given that they can't do it the conventional way, tell me what unconventional ways you are prepared to concede and to create. And there has been absolutely nothing. I mean, literally nothing. We have, as you know, some time back in 2016, a group of nuns asked the Pope to contemplate looking again at the diaconate, the permanent diaconate, as a possibility for women. Now, the initiative for that did not come from the Pope. It should have come from the Pope, but it didn't. He had to wait, till 3 years into his pontificate for when nuns arrive and ask him to do this. But in fairness, he did set it up. And that was then. This is now. I mean, how difficult can it be? I understand a report went in to the Pope. I understand the report may not have been acceptable and has gone back. So why aren't we told? Why aren't we kept up to date? Why are we kept on hold? If it's not going to happen, tell us. If there are problems, tell us what they are, so that a broader range of voices can be brought to bear. But why does it take so terribly long? I mean, there was we've had the male permanent diaconate unproblematically now for a number of years. And I also ask questions about, for example, after Vatican II, it was the case that women were allowed to be acolytes and readers at Mass, but take acolytes. and temporary acolytes. That is to say, women have been excluded by Paul VI from being what are called stable acolytes, even though that same Paul VI said that that particular role, the role of stable acolyte and stable lector, were roles available to the laity, but not to women. And you'd have to ask the question, well, why? And then the other question is, having allowed then that women could be temporary acolytes, and there's not a church, I'd say, hardly anywhere, where they perform that role regularly. I'm sure I certainly in my church see it regularly. But again, bishops were given a right to decide that their diocese wouldn't have women. Now, they can't make that decision in relation to men. There is no law that allows them to do that in the church, but a law allows them to exclude women. And even where they decide to include women as potential temporary lector or temporary acolytes, an individual parish priest can decide he's not going to have them in his place. And I think that's that is desperately unfortunate that the church allowed itself to create those exceptions, because what can one say about them except that they have the look about them of pure sexism? No. But what I do know is that the model the church is currently operating on, the underpinning model, is riddled with holes. The metaphor I used was that the church is suffering from metal fatigue, a bit like a plane. It's been flying long hours and strong and delivering people safely and doing a good job. But now there are a million little cracks that have not been observed. I listened to friends of mine telling me that there is no such problem they don't have the problem of clerical child sex abuse in certain parts of the world. I won't name them. And when I hear that, I really want to scream, because all that means is it is happening as it happened in Ireland 50 years ago, and these poor children have no protection.